This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. There's so much to talk about. We begin by asking how RBG's death is going to impact the presidential and Senate races in our state, along with other hot election issues. We move to education and talk about NCAE's urging teachers to lobby their school boards not to return to class, and talk about how UNC President Hans will have more say-so in appointing chancellors. I can't wait to hear our panel's comment, and speaking of which, they include Bev Perdue, former governor of North Carolina, Joe Mavretic, former House Speaker, Chris Fitzsimon, director of the state's Newsroom, and John Hood, syndicated author and columnist. We'll begin our uninterrupted discussion after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
I want to begin this week's show with a correction from last week. I stated that Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger accused NCAE of being cop killers. That was wrong. What Berger actually said was that NCAE openly embraces a cop-killing terrorist. A panelist further stated that Senator Berger held a press conference about Democrats who wanted to defund the police. It was really actually House Speaker Tim Moore, not Berger. We apologize for these inaccuracies. Now, let's begin the spin. In elections, we often expect an October surprise that can determine the outcome. It stands to reason in a very strange year, the surprise came in September, a vacancy to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the question is, how much of a factor is this going to be in determining the outcome? I want to ask all of the panelists, how big a factor will Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death be in the election outcomes? Joe Mavretic, I'll start with you.
Well, Tom, as a registered independent, I don't know, and the reason is that every day when I wake up and look at the newspaper and look at television, one day the D's have all these points that I think are reasonable, and the next day all the R's have points that I think are reasonable. When I look at the overall picture for the United States, I suspect that most everybody is just as confused if they're independents. I think the D's are saying you can't do that. You got to wait until the next president. And the R's say, no, you were going to go right now. And then we have two people from the New England who have unusual positions for me as a politician. I don't understand why they can figure out that they ought not to vote this time, but they ought to vote next time, not knowing who's going to be the president next time. To me, the whole issue is extraordinarily confusing, and I don't know how the outcome is going to be.
Joe, that might be the most honest answer we've ever gotten on NC Spin. John Hood, your take on this.
I think that if the question is the sort of theoretical vacancy and the procedural objections and counter arguments, I don't think that would have much effect on the election, whatever we might think about it personally. I think what might affect the election is the actual announcement, which is coming this weekend, of who the nominee from President Trump will be. I think that will be a galvanizing event for Democratic and Republican base voters. I don't think swing voters will be swayed as much by the Supreme Court question as they will by the economy and COVID-19 and things like that. But I think on balance, this might benefit Republicans in the election by ramping up the base and getting them more likely to vote.
Chris, a lot of people are saying this might end up being the demise of the U.S. Senate. What's your take on this issue?
Well, I don't. I think this gets both bases excited, but I think the outrage the Democrats had over Merrick Garland almost a year before the election, his nomination being withheld, I think it has a big impact on Senate races. Like Tom Tillis literally saying 4 years ago in June that we should allow. I think it was early, or maybe even earlier. We should allow the voters to have a say. The voters are voting. The election's underway. We need to hear from them. I think it gives Cal Cunningham another issue to criticize Tom Tillis over. Nationally, it's interesting, the polls that have been done since this, there was a Fox News poll released this morning that showed Joe Biden up 5 points in Ohio, a Fox News poll. And I think so. I think the Democratic base and some is certainly energized, and I think some swing voters are seeing this last sort of big giant example of hypocrisy as very as an important part of their decision.
Bev, what's your take on this?
My take is it's a wash, Tom. I think that Republicans are going to dig in once the announcement's made of whom the replacement is. Democrats will do the same. Democrats are raising tons of money all over the country for the election that will help us. But at the end of the day, it's a wash. Maybe not for Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham. It may come down to what the unofficial network is saying. There's a lot of talk all over the state and all over the country from women's groups of all brands and colors. And so I think that will help get the vote out. It's an amazing time in which we live. And to think that the last time I had the opportunity to talk to her was at Meredith. And the one thing she whispered in my ear was, I am not going to die before the election.
Wow.
And so I've ruminated on that all week and last week. I'm sorry about her death.
Hey, Tom?
Joe, when Senator Tillis, when President Trump was in Fayetteville this past week, Senator Tillis, in speaking, said that the Republicans know they can't keep the Senate control if they don't win North Carolina. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think from Tillis' point of view, that's true, but there are also some other races that also would affect it. Let's go back to the comment about the Senate collapsing. What a lot of voters don't do is look back and see why we have the procedures that we do. The confirmation vote in the Senate is placed there because every one of the states has 2 votes. It has nothing to do with population. The other thing is that the staggered terms in the Senate, 6 and 6, gives every state a chance to change colors from time to time. And in the Senate today, based on decisions that were made about Rule 20 back in, I think it was 2013, now that confirmation is a simple majority. That's 51. The rules are set up so that if you have only 50 each, the vice president breaks it. So we have to pay attention to why the setup is like it is.
All right, let's move to a story that's been breaking all week and has really gotten sort of complicated and a little bit bizarre. So bear with me on this. So let me try to walk through this. The State Board of Elections had a meeting on Tuesday, and they were talking about absentee ballots and some lawsuits that had been filed. Now, in order to be able to settle that lawsuit, the board unanimously agreed to make it easier to correct mistakes in mail-in ballots, including missing signatures for witnesses, ballots to be deposited in special drop boxes, and it allowed ballots that were received by November 12th to be counted. Now, after Speaker Moore and Senate President Pro Tem Berger complained about that, the 2 Republican members of the board resigned, saying they had been misled when they voted for these changes. The board held an emergency meeting on Friday morning, and the changes are due to go to court next week. I want to ask John and Chris, what are your takes on what's going on here? Is this political or what? Chris?
Well, of course it's political. I mean, we have a president of the United States that's saying he's not sure we'll have a smooth transition of power. He believes vote by mail is fraud. Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, said this week that the FBI director appointed by Trump was wrong when he said there's no evidence of mail-in fraud. This is part of a strategy. There are legitimate issues. The board was trying to settle a lawsuit. The primary ones are the ones you mentioned, which is if the witness signature is not there, someone could sign an affidavit still under penalty of wrongdoing, saying that it's a legitimate ballot, and as long as it was postmarked by Election Day, which would be received by November 12th, the vote should count. I'm confused by the Republican members of the Board of Elections who voted for this. Did they vote for something not knowing what they were doing? And what does that say? I feel like most of this is a political move to threaten the integrity, or at least give suspicion to people about our elections.
John, what's your take?
Completely different. This is an old
Boy, that's
tactic.
surprising.
This is an old tactic of collusive litigation. You get somebody to sue you. You can't get your bill through the legislature. You're the governor or attorney general, whatever. So you get someone to sue you, and then you settle to overturn a law that's been enacted. That's what happened here. The two Republicans were misled, it seems, by the Attorney General's office and others about what the bill, what the settlement actually did. It overturns a bill that was passed in June by members of by majorities of both parties, signed by Governor Cooper, that, among other things, requires that you have a witness sign your ballot. What this agreement does is throw that out, essentially, because if you don't get a witness to sign your ballot, then your ballot will be accepted anyway if you, not the witness, submit an affidavit. So it gets rid of a law, and we should not allow that. And I don't think it's going to happen, because I think it's going to be appealed. If it is in fact affirmed by the Superior Court, I think it will be appealed. I think there will be a federal lawsuit immediately filed. We've seen in other states the same lawyers, Mark Elias and others, have tried this. In other states, they have mostly been blocked, including in federal court. I think they will be blocked here because you simply can't use courts to rewrite election laws.
And the big question is whether or not all of this can be done in time for the election, and it throws further doubt on the election process this year. Bev, there have been more than 1 million requests for absentee ballots this year. 50% of them are from Democrats, 33% from unaffiliated voters, only 17% from Republicans. Why is it so one-sided? Is it because of all the rhetoric from Trump?
It's really one-sided all over the state. A lot of it is just opinion. I think the Democrats have done a really good job of talking to their voters, talking to unaffiliateds, and convincing them that something is wrong in America if we want to fire the sitting chief executive. Has nothing to do basically with Trump or Biden. It has to do with America. And I think Republicans have done very poorly in getting folks registered and out to early vote.
A WRAL poll this past week showed that only 24% of the people they surveyed had confidence that the absentee ballots will be counted fairly and accurately. 15% said they had no confidence whatsoever. Joe, what does this tell you about how this election is going to turn out?
Well, I think the betting money in Las Vegas is that on election night, when the ballots cast normally are counted, Trump wins. 2 or 3 days later, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, when the absentees are all counted and the mail-ins are all counted, Biden wins. And then it goes to the court. Somebody's going to sue. It goes to the court. And my question is, do we have in place a procedure to sit president after the term of the current president is over? And I'm not so sure that we do.
Yeah, well, it's going to be obviously a question for some time to come. John, when President Trump was in Fayetteville, or when President Trump was in the state Thursday, he touted an executive order that he signed that he said was going to be better than Obamacare, was going to replace it. We're going to talk about that more next week. But Biden made his first appearance in North Carolina on Wednesday. We hear that there's only 1% of the electorate that has not made their mind up who they're going to vote for president. Do these appearances make that much difference?
They matter some. You're absolutely right. The number of true swing voters in the presidential race is very low. But remember, the number of swing voters in other races down the ballot is not low. Or it's not that low. I mean, there are lots of undecideds in the Senate race, the governor's race, other races. And so the two parties, their leaders are the presidential nominees, and they're trying to get their base turned out and clarify the party's message, not just the presidential campaign's message.
We've started debate season. which I think the best sign is that it won't be long before voting when debate season starts. Chris, we've had 2 debates between the 2 U.S. Senate challenger, Cal Cunningham and Tom Tillis. Anything notable in these debates so far, these 2 debates?
I thought Cal Cunningham did much better in the second debate than he did in the first debate. But the fact that there was no bombshell in this debate, people weren't really talking about it nearly as much. I think as we mentioned last time, the debates, unless there's some major issue on one side or the other, are generally decided by how they're covered, what people can use in commercials. I don't think either debate has changed the calculus. Cunningham is ahead in virtually every poll. That's been true for months.
We also had the North Carolina Association of School Administrators had sort of a virtual debate between the governor and Dan Forrest and the 2 candidates for Secretary of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Jen Mangrum and Catherine Truitt. The big issue there, Bev, with the school superintendent race was Mangrum criticized Truitt for a Republican legislature starving education with inadequate funding. Truitt said that she was critical of Mangrum because Mangrum proclaimed she wasn't going to work with a legislature that continues to move schools in the wrong direction. What's the issue here in this race? Is there a big issue? I thought school choice was really the big issue in this race.
And it didn't turn out to be that way on the debate, but it is an issue all over the state. Voters are curious, concerned about school choice. Right now, the whole issue is around digital and how parents can sustain themselves. And so that debate didn't really make a difference. I don't think any of these debates are making a real difference. I don't see a swing anywhere from the presidential on down. I'm anxious for Tuesday night just to hear the presidential candidates. I think that will affect everywhere.
I would say on the school superintendent race in particular, Tom, I think the part you mentioned at the end is important, and what Bev just said is important. Actually, I think the big issue is school opening. It's not.
And we're going to talk about that in a minute.
People care about these other issues. But right now, the question is: are schools even going to be open for their children?
We're going to get to that in just a second. You're getting ahead of me here a little bit. Joe, last week, David Price, who's the dean of the North Carolina House delegation, said that North Carolina was no longer a center-right state. It was now more of a center-center state. You agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think if you look at the election results over the last, 5, 6 years, that's pretty much the case. But I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to what Congressman Price says about partisan politics.
All right. Last week we reported Governor Cooper had announced children in grades K through 5 could go back to the classroom early next month. We speculated as to whether or not the classroom teachers would be willing to return. The North Carolina Association of Educators held a meeting, and they're asking their members to lobby local school boards not to return to the classroom. Bev, the public's clearly saying virtual learning isn't working, and they're demanding a return to class. NCAE only has about 5% of the teachers as members. Are they hurting themselves here?
I don't think they're hurting NCAE, but I do think that your statement that virtual learning isn't working is incorrect. Virtual learning is working. It's just too much of it. The teacher needs to have face time with the kids. And that's the different parents who have lost their jobs or who are away from their job because they're having to stay home with their kid to educate the kid are the people who are fussing the most. I think that teachers are scared about the environment of going back to the school. But every school that I've monitored across the country, and I'm heavily involved in this work, has gone back fairly safety. If you take temperatures and if you do the social distancing, there hasn't been a prevalence across the country. So I think it'll all wash out. I do think they'll go back to school. Most of them. I understand there's lots of tension in Wake County, but I believe those kids will go back to school October 16th, as they should. They need to be back in the classroom.
This past week, I interviewed Secretary Mandy Cohen over the air, and I asked her, had there been any cases of clusters in public schools that or schools in general that have gone back to class? She said there had been about 10 in the state, that it wasn't particularly significant. More of the cases came from adults who got the virus than from students. Chris, what does that tell you? Does that say it's okay to go back to class?
Well, it tells us that we need to proceed cautiously. I mean, we have given local school boards the authority to do that. I have some concern about it, but I'm glad we are able to do it safely where we can. There have been cases in public and private schools where kids have been quarantined, classes have been canceled. I think we'll still see that happen as we go forward. And we're talking about what's happening now as we end September. We don't know what the fall's going to bring, what the flu season is going to bring, what the combination of those things will bring. I think we should continue to have kids have the opportunity and school boards to make the decision. I think we need to proceed cautiously as we have done in North Carolina. It's worth reminding, and I remind us every week at the end of the show, North Carolina's death rate from the coronavirus is literally half of our neighbor in South Carolina, half of a lot of southern states. We're doing it right. I think Governor Cooper's doing a good job, as are local school boards trying to make the best decisions they can for their community.
Yes, go ahead.
Tom, with regard to the issue about what local boards are doing, number one, I continue to follow Chatham County, and the reason that I do that is that absent Wake and Mecklenburg, Chatham County is kind of a leader in the average county school board issues. That's the first thing I'd watch what they're doing. And number two, with regard to NCAE, their concern is with adults, not with students.
John, let's move to higher education for a second here. The UNC Board of Governors met last week. And during the course of the meeting, they gave President Peter Hans more authority in choosing chancellors. Specifically, what they said is that Hans, when there is a vacancy among the public university system, Hans can recommend 2 candidates to that university's board. Further, they have to return one of them as a recommendation. What do you think about this change?
There may be a case for strengthening the UNC president's hand in multiple areas, including hiring and firing, but I don't think this was a good change. If we're going to have the Board of Trustees be the initial party that vets, that creates a list of candidates and sends them to the president, then I think we ought to leave that the way it is and not have the president be able to put candidates in at the front end of the pipeline and then make the decision at the back end of the pipeline.
It's interesting. Bev, you were involved in this for quite some time. Tell us your take on it.
My take is that with Peter Hans, it's perfectly fine. We know Peter, we respect him, he's a great leader. But there will be another president of the university, and there will be other boards of trustee members. I don't think it's a wise decision long-term for North Carolina. I think there should be more opinion and less politics.
Chris, we got a report during this Board of Governors meeting that half of the universities, state-supported universities, have had record enrollments this first semester. Why do you think that's the case? We thought it would be declining enrollments.
Well, I think people still want to get a higher education. They realize the value of it. They know the virus at some point is going to pass. We're going to have a vaccine. Also, in times of economic distress, people tend to go back to school. I think it's a combination of a lot of those things. I do want to agree with John and Governor Perdue about the change that you mentioned in the Board of Governors. It's interesting that both Art Pope, I believe, and Leo Daughtry voted against the change. So if an NC Spin panelist is against the change, like Leo, I'm against it.
Keep
Joe,
that
your
rule
take.
in mind.
Yeah,
That's
Joe,
a
your
very
take.
valuable rule.
Very quickly.
I've written about this, and so I'm interested in how Peter Hans handles the issue of diversity among chancellors in the 16 universities.
All right, let's get to something that we don't know, and I'm going to ask the panel to tell us. Chris, I'll start with you.
Well, I continue to be amazed by the whole debate over masks. Deborah Birx went to Louisiana yesterday, the doctor who's on a high-ranking federal official, and praised them for their mask mandates and how they were doing things. And yet we have politicians in North Carolina and even conservative think tanks questioning the legitimacy of mask rules, even at this point in the virus, which is hurting us all.
I got 2 minutes left in show. Bev Perdue, tell us something we don't know.
I'm good on trivia. During a pandemic, you know odd things are going to happen socially with people clustered in a home together. 1.5 million fewer babies, Brookings has estimated, will happen as a result of the pandemic. And
That's
the divorce rate
not
the divorce rate has increased 34%.
Joe, I've got about 30 seconds. Tell us something we don't know.
Pryor Gibson got put in at employment security to reduce the backlog. As of this morning, it's down to less than 1%, and they've distributed $8 billion to unemployed North Carolinians.
Well, and Pryor took over a mess there. John, tell us something we don't know.
In this year of calamity, I've got good news. The fall colors in North Carolina, the leaves are going to be lovely, according to analysis from NC State Forestry.
And we can get in our cars and drive.
You can do it in your car and outside and watch the beautiful leaves from mountains to coast.
Yeah.
Without a mask.
We have to get masks in every topic. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And by the way, sign up for that newsletter. It's free. And join us next week when two of our state's top political science professors are going to give you their take on where things stand in the elections. Should be a very, very interesting show. Until that time, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Your life is more flexible and efficient than ever, and your energy is too. See how North Carolina's electric cooperatives are building a brighter future for the rural communities we serve at ncelectriccooperatives.com/brighter.
The big issue in 2020 is healthcare. Let's talk basics. You are the key to your own personal health, but there is strong evidence that if you have a relationship with a family physician, your quality of life will be better. You'll likely live longer, and you'll have 33% lower healthcare costs. Your family doctor knows you, has your medical history, and can quickly diagnose health problems. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.